Welcome to Photography Fundamentals, the roller coaster ride that is the foundations of your photography. But before I start, I'd like you to ask yourself this question. What would you like to get out of this session? This means hopefully that you're more likely to engage with it and ask questions and give an understanding of where you want your learning journey to go. And hopefully you'll get a fist pump at the end as well. I've split Photography Fundamentals into 6 topics. These are the exposure triangle, what's a stop, depth of field, freeze and blur, panning, and avoiding camera shake. And it's important to understand that the information I'm going to give you over these 6 topics is relevant whether you're using a film camera or a digital camera. So let's start with the second topic. What's a stop? So what is a stop? Well, if you're thinking it's a bus stop, please leave now, get on that bus. Because in reality, we're talking about what is a stop? It's the halving or doubling the amount of light hitting the film or sensor when taking an image. And we can control that stop using any of the 3 elements of the exposure triangle that we learnt about in the first video. Aperture, the hole, the shutter speed, the time, and the ISO, the sensitivity. Or we could use a combination of some or all of these 3 elements. So let's look at them. Controlling it with ISO. Well, if you have 200 ISO and you change the sensitivity to 100 ISO, that's 1 stop less light, because that's half the amount of light, because 100 ISO is half the sensitivity of 200 ISO. And this is the one that most people understand, because 100 is half of 200. I can get on board with that. I understand that. So let's look at it with some images. If I shot one with 1600 ISO and I changed it to 800 ISO, that halves the amount of light. And notice I've changed from 1600 ISO to 800 ISO. Notice I've kept the rest of the exposure triangle the same. 250th of a second at f4, 250th of a second f4. And you can see the image has gone darker because the sensor is less sensitive to light, so it's going to record it slower. If I shoot with 100 ISO and I go to 200 ISO, that doubles the amount of light. I am going to get some more digital noise, but it's really not going to play any part in this image as I'm only going to 200 ISO. But notice, 30th of a second at f4, 30th of a second at f4. Gone from 100 ISO to 200 ISO, and you can see this image is far brighter. It's quicker and reacting to the light. If we go to shutter speed, we have 125th of a second, and if we go to 250th of a second, it is 1 stop less light. It's half the amount of light, because 250th of a second is twice as fast as 125th of a second. Now here's some shutters. Now notice these shutters are only a representation and they're not an accurate representation of these times here. But you can get a feel for it. If you have 125th of a second and you go to a 60th of a second, it doubles the amount of light. Look, there's 125th and a 60th. The sensor is seeing the light for a lot longer. Twice the amount. And if I go from 125th of a second to 250th of a second, it halves the amount of light because the shutter's getting faster. As you see, 125th, 250th, the sensor's getting a lot less light. And if I go to f-stop, aperture, if I'm using f5.6 and I go to f8, it's 1 stop less light. It's half the amount of light because f8 is half the size of f5.6. Now this is the hardest one to get on board with because these numbers don't seem to relate to each other. But trust me, f5.6 hole, f8 hole, the hole's getting smaller, it's actually letting in half the amount of light. And f16 to f11, that hole is double the size, so it lets in double the amount of light. Now here's a very big chart with lots of numbers, so you'll probably want to pause the video at this moment. But these are all the charts that you've seen before, and it just goes to show up here, very sensitive ISO, very sensitive sensor, lots of light. Fast, slow shutter speeds even, lots of light. And big apertures, big holes, small f-stop numbers, lots of light. Here we've got very low sensitivity, 100 ISO, 200 ISO, very slow ISOs, less light. Very fast shutter speeds, thousandth of a second, 2,000th of a second, less light again. And again, big f-stop numbers, meaning very small holes, f22, f32. And I've even put f64. You get these on 5.4 cameras. So next we're going to cover depth of field. The next topic, the next video will be depth of field. I do hope you'll come along and watch that as well. Thanks very much for listening today. And remember, did you get out of what you wanted out of this session? Hopefully you did. Hopefully you got that fist pump. If you didn't, then please do get in contact, either on Teams or drop me an email at djman@falmouth.ac.uk. But for now, thanks for listening and goodbye.